Okay, welcome to lecture number 3. In this lecture, I'm going to take up some of the more complicated examples towards the end of chapter 25. I'm going to talk about what Roig-Frankely refers to as the moving augmented sixth chord, and then I'll also talk about the peculiar spelling of the German sixth chord, which is the doubly augmented fourth chord. You don't see it very often, but I'd like you to recognize it. And then finally, I'll talk about what happens when you invert an augmented sixth chord and make it into a diminished third chord. Let's start on the handout. I'm going to look at the bottom of page 4 on the handout. Okay, Dr. Roig-Frankely notes that sometimes one voice or one part of an augmented sixth chord may have do, re, mi, or the opposite, mi, re, do, as a moving line, while the others hold the rest of the chord's notes. And this results in a quick succession of the Italian, French, and German augmented sixth chords, or the same chords in the reverse order. So take a look at this example here. In the key of E minor, we have a sixth chord, and then it goes to an Italian augmented sixth on beat 2 with do in the alto. But the do moves up to re and then up to mi, so that by the end of the measure, what we have is a German sixth with lay, fi, mi, and do. It's very awkward to have to label each one of these augmented sixth chords. I would actually recommend that you simply identify this as an augmented sixth chord. Just write +6 underneath it, and that will let me know that you understand that this is an augmented sixth chord. The C and the A sharp are going to resolve to B's in the next measure. And we don't really need to note the individual nationalities that happen every eighth note. And again, Roig-Frankely calls this a moving augmented sixth chord because it moves from one to the other. He jokes that you could think of this as kind of a European Union augmented sixth chord, with the Italians, the French, and the Germans all united into the same organization. Roig-Frankely is Spanish, so I guess this is something that has geopolitical meaning for him. As we resolve our German augmented sixth chord to 5, take a quick look at what I've done. I have put a G in the alto, and that note is a non-chord tone. What kind of a non-chord tone is it? It comes from the same note, and it resolves down by step. So it's a suspension. It's sort of a weird suspension. It's a 6-5 suspension. I did that to avoid the parallel fifths, G, C, moving to B, F sharp. I allow the bass to move first, and then the alto will move afterwards so that we don't quite have those immediate parallel fifths, but I don't go to a full-blown cadential 6-4 on the downbeat. In a minute, I'll play this first example with you. The second example does the same thing, but it does it in reverse. We start on a 6 chord, and then we go to a German augmented sixth chord, and then the mi moves down to re, and finally to do. So by the end of the measure, we're on an Italian augmented sixth chord. The 2 E's in the soprano and alto move in opposite directions. We go to a 5 chord, and then we resolve it to a 1. Let me play these 2 examples for you. I'm going to start by playing 1-4-5-1 in E minor, and then I'll play each of the 2 measure pairs. We will turn now to the last page of the handout, and I will talk to you about the doubly augmented fourth chord. In a major key, the chord progression where you go from a German augmented sixth to a cadential 6-4 and then to a 5 chord will result in one voice having this pattern of scale degrees: mi, and then mi, and then re. Okay, so think about what those notes are. Why don't you think about it in E major, because that's what the example is in. We'll have May, which is G natural, and then in the cadential 6/4, it'll go up to Mi, G sharp, and then down to Re, which is F sharp. Now, composers sometimes felt that it was more natural to spell the May as a Re. That's a raised scale degree 2. Okay, when you raise scale degree 4, Fa becomes Fi. When you raise scale degree 2, Re becomes Re. So in E major, May is G natural, and Re is enharmonically equivalent. It's an F double sharp. The reason for spelling the note as an F double sharp is because it's moving up. When we have chromatic notes, the general rule is that chromatically lowered notes go down and chromatically raised notes go up. Now, this spelling of the chord turns the perfect fifth of the German augmented sixth into a really weird interval, a doubly augmented fourth, or ++4. Let's take a look at examples B and C and look at how those play out. So the tenor is the one that has the May, Mi, Re. So we've got a 1 chord, then we go to the German sixth with the G being May, but then we go to a major cadential 6/4 chord. So it's a major 1/6/4, and the G natural becomes G sharp. And then when it resolves down to Re. So here's our May, Mi, Re. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly okay to write the German augmented sixth with that spelling. However, we are sometimes going to see this. Letter C shows the doubly augmented fourth chord. The May is now spelled as Re, F double sharp, and that chromatically raised note resolves up to Mi. And then in this example, Mi doesn't go back down to Re, it goes up to Fa. Notice that if you're not paying attention, you might be tempted to call this chord a French augmented sixth, because you might not see that accidental there, and you might think that this was just an F sharp, which is Re. This is a perfectly understandable answer. I will probably still take a little bit of points off if you do this on a test. On your homework, I will certainly take points off because I want you to recognize the doubly augmented fourth chord. But if you misidentify the German as a French augmented sixth chord, it's not a huge big deal. As long as you can tell that it's an augmented sixth chord, you're pretty much on the right track. Take a look at the tenor's line in these two examples. In this example, example B, the tenor goes G sharp, G, G sharp. And that's a little bit of a weird spelling. It's kind of weird when you've got lower neighbor motion to have the notes all be on the same space like this. I think it looks easier for the tenor to read if you spell it with the double sharp, G sharp, F double sharp, G sharp, because that way the tenor can see that his line is going down and then back up. And I ask you the question, which voices in example C have the interval of the doubly augmented fourth? And the answer is that it's the bass and the tenor. C to F would be a perfect fourth, C to F sharp is an augmented fourth, and C to F double sharp is a doubly augmented fourth. Let me play these two examples for you. You'll hear that there's no difference between the first three chords of letter B and the first three chords of letter C. The only difference is in the tenor note of the fourth chord. But follow along in the music and try to think about the scale degrees. Think about Mi, May, Mi, Re in the tenor versus Mi, Re, Mi, Fa in the tenor. Example B. Example C. Finally, I'd like to move on and talk about the inversion of an augmented sixth chord, which is a diminished third chord. I've told you that lay is usually the bass note in an augmented sixth chord, but another note can be in the bass. Do could be in the bass, or fi could be in the bass. And putting fi in the bass and lay in an upper voice inverts the augmented sixth interval into a diminished third, or a diminished tenth is more likely. So take a look at example E above. And if you want to, you might want to compare it to example B, which is directly above it. Okay, example E has A sharp, which is fi, E, which is do, G, which is may, and C, which is lay. So now we have the lay in the soprano and the fi in the bass. And if you squint at it, you can see that it's a diminished tenth, right? AC would be a minor tenth, and A sharp C is a diminished tenth. Compare that to the chord just above it, or almost just above it, where we have C in the bass and A sharp in the soprano. That's our augmented sixth. And when they switch positions, we have a diminished tenth. Notice that the other thing that happens here is that the two notes which were a perfect fifth in the chord in example B, the C and the G, are now a perfect fourth, G and C, and they're moving to the B major chord in parallel perfect fourths. Probably the reason that the German augmented sixth is most often turned into the diminished third compared to the other types of augmented sixths is that the diminished third chord gives us another opportunity to avoid those parallel fifths by turning them into parallel perfect fourths. So you should be prepared to recognize examples of the diminished third chord. If you just want to call it a diminished third, you may, or you can be more specific. You can say it's an Italian diminished third, or a French diminished third, or a German diminished third chord. This concludes the lectures on augmented sixth chords.